Okay, here we go. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is. I hope it's good to be where you are, because it is really good to be here today. My name is Baltimore Fats, and this is Mud City. Yeah, okay. So I'm just going to jump right in. Next week is the 113th anniversary of the Jubilee, and I thought that's kind of where I would be picking up. And so I spent a little bit of time on Labor Day and yesterday, started reacquainting myself with that material a little bit because I really haven't looked at it over the summer. And I wanted to start by looking at some of the people who are members of that burnt district commission and political figures of that, very early 1900s Baltimore. And I came across this guy who served on the commission. His name was Evan H. Morgan, and the name Morgan, of course, interested me right away. I thought, for obvious reasons I would hope to people, I thought that maybe he would be a banker or something. But he wasn't. He was a writer for the most part. The only thing I could really find was this obituary from March 13th of 1926. The only detailed information I could find about him, internet searches and so forth. I'm hoping to find more. So he was not a Baltimore or Maryland native. He was born in New Orleans, and he moved to Boston after his marriage, and he entered newspaper work, and he became telegraph editor of the Boston Herald and a contributor to other newspapers as well as magazines in different parts of the country. All right, he wrote stories for juvenile publications, and he also wrote political articles. And that's interesting to me because I wonder, how much political subtext is in these juvenile stories, juvenile publications that he contributed to, the subliminal political thing. I'm sure that kind of thing was happening. But he moves to Baltimore in 1896 and immediately becomes interested in politics. And he was secretary of the Committee of Five in the summer of 1898. So within 2 years, he finds himself in, quite a situation already, and this Committee of Five conducts the primaries for the Democratic Party under the in the heyday of this I. Freeman Rassin, and his name has come up, and he's going to come up quite a bit because he's a major player down the line. So he gets elected to the city council in 1899, and again in 1903 on the McLean ticket, and McLean was mayor during the Great Fire, and where he was chosen as president of that branch of the city council. Now, to me, I don't know, within 7 years of moving to Baltimore, he goes from right up this political ladder here. That seems pretty amazing to me, and not coincidental. Like he must have been connected in some way, shape, or form. And it's interesting that he retires right in the middle of his time on the committee in 1905 as a relatively young man, 52 years old, and he purchases a farm at Phoenix, Baltimore County. Now, I don't think that Phoenix is still there. It must be called something else now because it doesn't ring a bell to me. But the symbolism of the Phoenix shouldn't be lost on anyone either, and so that's very interesting. So he must have done quite well for himself on city council and as a writer in order to be able to retire and live for 20-some years, on his farm in Phoenix. So I wanted to find out more, like connect his family and stuff, but I really couldn't do it. I couldn't find any genealogies that connected him anywhere. I couldn't find him in any genealogy. But while I was looking, I found this guy, James Morgan Sr., born in 1620 in Wales, in this area of Wales here, and he dies at Bohemia Manor, Chesapeake, Cecil County, Maryland in 1691 at the age of 71. Now, I don't know if anybody remembers, but this Bohemia Manor has come up before. And I did an episode called La Boheme that focused on this guy, Augustine Herman. Now, Augustine Herman was allegedly... Get out of there. Augustine Herman was allegedly awarded this property, this Bohemia Manor in Cecil County, as a commission for creating this map for Cecil Calvert, the second Lord Baltimore. And what's interesting about this map, looking at it now, is that if this map was made for Cecil, and he gets this Bohemian Manor's 4,000 acres, and in the end, Herman has an estate of 30,000 acres or something. He becomes one of the largest landholders in North America at that time in the mid to late 1600s. But looking at this map, if it's made for Cecil, why is Virginia blazoned across the top and Maryland like broken up weirdly? It's not even easy to read here, right? So I don't quite understand that. And I do have some problems with this map. It allegedly took him 10 years to make, and again, he was well rewarded for it. And I'm not going to get back all into the history of it now, but I think it's interesting that, he's the first Lord of Bohemia Manor, 1660, which is, I guess, when he's given the land, but the map isn't done until 1670, if I remember correctly. Right? He dies in 1686, just a few years before our boy James Morgan over here. And so I think that's interesting, but there also is a connection with the Bohemia Manor School, which was an early Jesuit school in Maryland, and I touched on that in the La Boheme video as well, and I'm just going to touch on it again briefly here because I'm beginning to think that, like, this is not a coincidence, this James Morgan showing up here at this property, right? And so it started in, the 1740s, and very little is known about this school, although there is some stuff out there. Like, I found this book at the library, and I posted this in that other video as well, Old Bohemia, which talks about the Bohemian churches that were set up for the Jesuits. So I'm sure there's some information in there. But we do know that John Carroll went there, and he goes on to become the first bishop in America and a very influential figure in the Catholic Church. But really what it was a boarding school and a preparatory school for St. Omer's College in Flanders. A major, major Jesuit institution. All right? And so, like I said, I was thinking there can't be a coincidence here. So what can I find by rabbit-holing James Morgan's family line paternally, as I like to do? And so I start just clicking through and seeing how far I can get with this. And his father was Morgan Lewis, and going back, his father was Lewis Ott Morgan, right? And one thing that I learned while doing this, not only that there's a lot of this NN, no name, is that the Welsh names, at least back in the day, they weren't really surnames. You became son of. All right, so Lewis, son of Morgan, right? Morgan, son of Edward, and so on and so on and so on. Now, I started to go through all of this and just started clicking away and going, see how far back it would take me. And the first interesting name I came to is this one. And God bless the Welsh and their impronounceable names. So many consonants in a row. It's unbelievable. But the first interesting name I came across was this guy, and I'm going to pronounce it FATa Sindul. That's a horrible butchering of that. But he was Lord of Liffen. And now just to give you an idea, clicking through, his is the 17th name paternally going back on that Genie website. All right, and so I see that he's Lord of... I didn't look it up, but Lord of Liffen is a river in Wales, and so he's Lord of the River, right? And this is 1085 to 1169, so late 11th century, early 12th century, right? And it lists him as a member of these 15 tribes of North Wales, right? Sindul, right? The first of the 15 tribes. And so I wanted to find out a little bit more of that, and really what I'm guessing is there really weren't 15 tribes, there were 5, right? There were the 5 royal tribes of Wales, and that the 15 comes from offshoots of these 5 families, cousins and so on and so forth, all right? And so this is interesting right away that they have a photo here, and it says the photograph below shows a scene from the investiture of Prince Charles as Prince of Wales, 1st July 1969. On the walls of the tower to the left are shown the coats of arms of 6 old kingdoms of Wales, including the 5 royal tribes, as follows, and we'll get into that. But it's interesting, right? And here's that ceremony a little bit. And it's interesting that right away, the Prince of Wales is brought up. And it's going to get more interesting too. But here are the tribes, right? And the first one is this Gruffydd Sinan, right? The first of the 5 royal tribes, and that's because he recovers the crown of North Wales, which is the Gwynedd crown, and I'm going to get more into that in a minute. All right? And then the second is Rhys ap Tudor, and immediately when I read that, I was like, Tudor, right? Because that's the phonetic pronunciation. I mean, it kind of has to be. And when you read through this, it says the family also descend from Sir Rhys ap Thomas, the great Garter knight and military commander who mustered the army of Henry Tudor on Long Mountain by Welshpool and played such an important role in Henry's subsequent victory at Bosworth. So Welsh connections to the house Tudor, anyway, right? Which is kind of amazing to me, considering the way this story goes. And the connections I'm trying to make in, how a lot of our American history could be fabricated to cover up connections to these old royal houses. All right, the number 3 family, Bledden ap Sinfin. 4 is Easton ap Gorgrant. I can't even say it. Gwargant. Gwar. And then finally, Elston Gladred. And again, I think there's a lot of nepotism in these royal families to begin with, and so 5 may even be an overestimation. And of course, it's interesting with the Prince of Wales. He came up not that long ago for us with Prince Edward, who became King Edward VIII, of course, who abdicated his throne to Mary Wallace Simpson of Baltimore. And I'm sure there'll be more of that down the line. So I wanted to continue on this search going through James Morgan's family. And the list is extensive. It goes on and on. And so he was number 17, right? Huffa was number 17. The next most interesting name that came up was number 36, right? And there's going to be no coincidence that this guy is number 36. And his name was Cuneddo Weldig, I guess, right? And I love his father's name was Eternus. Yeah, how do you live up to that unless you live forever? But Cunedda here is the progenitor of the royal dynasty of Gwynedd, who it was just described as being the number 1, the most important of the 5 royal tribes. So I can trace this guy all the way to the founding father of the royal dynasty of Gwynedd. And that's really interesting. All right, and it says that his name, from the Brythonic word Kuno Dagos, meaning good hound warrior, or having good hounds and warriors. Now, I think if you were to bring this more in the modern age, you would call him a dog of war. That's the way I have to look at it. And they talk about his grandfather here, and it goes back because his grandfather, Pattern Baseroot, is number 38 on my list, connecting directly to this James Morgan, who dies at Bohemia Manor. Right? And so, according to Old Welsh tradition contained in section 62 of the Historia Brittonum, and now this was a book written by Geoffrey of Monmouth, and that's going to come up later again, because a lot of this is going to tie into the deeper history that I'm going to be bringing in Baltimore. Right? It says that Cunedda came from the Manor Godaden, right? Modern Clackmannanshire region of Scotland. And so when I look at that, all right, here it is up here, right? And the region of Wales, the North Wales, this Gwynedd, is here. And so this is, it's quite a journey, right? And one interesting point that I wanted to bring up about this whole thing is that this line here, though Manor Godaden was located within the territory of modern Scotland as part of the Old North, it is also an intrinsic part of the Welsh history, as both the Welsh and the men of the North were self-perceived as a single people, collectively referred to as the Cymry. Now, that's interesting that that they would consider themselves of the same lineage for such a large portion of the country. I don't know. I think that's really telling, and it's probably going to be bigger part down the line, and that, the location is at the Firth of Forth, which is a estuary that dumps the Forth River and others, I guess, and it's not far from Edinburgh and so forth. But getting back to Cuneta, coming from that northern region of Scotland, he's in charge of troops, these Votadini, which could be a combination of both like Scottish clans and Roman troops, because this is of that era. This is 400s, or at the very end of the Roman occupation of Britain, or Britannia, as it was called. Now, it's been suggested here that either he was acting under orders of Magnus Maximus, right, or Vortigern. And I'm going to get into both of these guys a little bit, the High King of Britain at that time. All right, but here, this is an interesting thing that's put forth here. It says, the suggestion that Cuneta was operating under the instructions of Rome has been challenged. Now, I don't know. I don't know why it would be challenged, right? Because, I don't know, if you were, it's not easy for me, or rather, it's easy for me to imagine that if Rome had occupied Britain and needed to, for whatever reason, get out of there, that you could create proxies for yourself by promoting people like Cuneta into these positions of power, and then when you leave, you're still running the show by proxy, like Cuneta would report to some Romans, or the other side, this Vortigern. And again, I'll get to him in just a minute. But I don't think that suggestion should be so easily dismissed. I think the proxy idea is a good one. He leaves Scotland and he goes over to North Wales, where he helps defend and defeat this Irish invasion who was trying to occupy that land at the time. And that's when he kind of becomes king, all right? At least of that area. A little bit more into this, but I wanted to bring this up, this Alt Cuneta, or this hill of Alt Cuneta. And it says it's probably associated with Cuneta, but of course it has his name, right? So I would think so. But there were amateur excavations of this site in the 19th century that revealed an Iron Age hill fort and several collapsed stone cists containing the buried but well-preserved skeletons of several men with formidable physical proportions. At least one of these was found in a seated position, and another buried beneath a massive stone shield, which is in quotes here, shield in quotes, right? Who had apparently been killed by a head wound. The bones appear to have been sent to various museums and have all since been woefully lost. No. Large bones found in a burial mound of late Roman Britain, lost? Get out of town. That's not a familiar story at all, right? So interesting, again, that I can connect, this guy who died in 1690 at Bohemia to this guy. But let's look further. Let's go to the 38th name on our list, this Pedarn Besrud, right? And it literally translates as Paternus of the Scarlet Robe, right? And son of Tegid, right? Tegid ap Iago. So it's put forth that he could have been a Roman of high rank, placed in command of those troops that his grandson will command as well in Man Algadadin, right? And by the Emperor Magnus Maximus, which is a name that I love because it just means the greatest great. But how great could he have been if he's has to leave Britannia? So it's interesting that the name, as they have it here, is Pedarn Redcoat. And when you go forward into the history of Britain, that the army wore redcoats. And of course, in America, the redcoats are coming, the redcoats are coming. But it's one of the 13 treasures of the island of Britain. And so I wanted to look up the 13 treasures of the island of Britain. I thought that was interesting because I'd never heard of this before. And it's Welsh lore, and it's a list of sort of magic items. And I'm not going to go too into detail, but there's some amazing ones, right? And all right, and the list is, the first one is this white hilt, and it's a sword that bursts into flames if you wanted to use it, right? And then there's this magic picnic basket of Gwyndno Gaharner. Right? And so if you put food in for one, you would open it up and there'd be food for 100, right? There was a drinking vessel, this horn that whatever you wished for would be in it. Right? We had a magic chariot that would bring you anywhere you wanted. This one I don't understand is a staple at the foot of the bed. Whatever horse he might wish for, he would find in the halter. I'm not sure about that one. This knife is kind of weird as well. It would serve 24 men to eat at a table. This cauldron here would cook meat only for the brave. If you were a coward, it was not going to cook your meat, And there's a whetstone that if you were a brave man, you sharpened your sword on this whetstone, your sword would kill. But if you were a cowardly man and you used the whetstone, it would not kill. And here's the coat. And the coat was if a well-born man put it on, it would be the right size. But if a churl, it would not go upon him. So I don't know what churl is. I guess a peasant, maybe. I think that's an amazing story that can be connected. So let's get back to the family here, right? The Morgan family. And there's some connections throughout this whole Morgan family to the legends of King Arthur, which I'll touch on in a little bit. But now I want to go back because when they talk about this Historia Brittonum, but it comes because they're talking about Malgwyn and his ancestors. Now, Malgwyn was his great-grandson, Cuneda's, but he's not on my list, so he must come from another son of Cuneda. But that would make him a cousin or something of James Morgan, which is interesting. Malgwyn, a great king, was reigning among the Britons in the region of Gwynedd. So I want to continue with the family. And, so his grandfather was, the red coat. But his great-grandson was this king named Malgwyn. And it's in reference to him that we learn that Cuneda comes from Manog Gadodin, all right, in this Historia Brittonum. What can we find out about him? So his name is also Princely Hound, another dog of war. And he's the first one, Cuneda goes over to Wales, starts the war with the invading Irish and people who are living there, and, that continues through his son into his grandson here. And he's the first one who gets to sort of enjoy the spoils, the first true king, right? And he was a generous contributor for the cause of Christianity throughout Wales, which is interesting. And I did read further that he does even become a monk, but that doesn't last for him. He's not cut out for the monkish life. But the only contemporary information about him is provided by this guy Gildas. And so he was a high king. And now in doing my initial research for this, of course, the high king, another word for high king was king of the Britons. King of the who? King of the Britons. Who are the Britons? Well, it turns out that the Britons were the Welsh. That was the name for them, and it didn't necessarily pertain to all of England as it was then. So let's get to this story about him in Gildas, right? And in Gildas, in his work On the Ruin and Conquest of Britain, written around 540 AD, Gildas makes an allegorical condemnation of 5 British kings by likening them to the beasts of the Book of Revelations, the lion, the leopard, the bear, and the dragon, with the dragon being supreme among them. And he says that Malgwyn is the dragon of the island, and goes on with a litany of moral accusations in the process of describing him almost as a regional high king, again, king of the Britons. And the Isle of Anglesey was the base of power for the kings of Gwynedd. So that's what it means by dragon of the Isle. Now, I think it's interesting that, it says 5 kings, but there's only 4 animals in the books of Revelation, or that these beasts from the book of Revelation. But the lion is on almost every shield, every coat of arms. The leopard is part of the coat of arms for the family Calvert, the Lord's Baltimore. I haven't seen a bear yet. And then there's the dragon, of course. We all know about the verms. The Dracos, the dragons, the worm knights. They're going to come back. I know they are. So I thought that was really kind of amazing that those types of connections could be made. And bringing it back further, now I mentioned how extensive this list is, right? It's 50 names. By clicking back, 50 times. And now, again, Cuneta was 36 and Padarn of the Scarlet Robe was 38. Bringing it all the way to the end was number 50. And that's this guy, this Owain Aflach. All right, and there isn't much for him except that, he was circa 40 BC and perhaps died in around 10 BC. All right, there's not much information for him, but they do have a little bit about the family name. It's a man's name found in several medieval Welsh genealogies where he is made son of Baltimore. According to a medieval Welsh triad, Alflach was the father of the goddess Modron. Of course, when I see Affleck, all I would think about is like either the insurance duck or Ben Affleck. Right? So I'm sure there's probably a connection to Ben Affleck's family and this Welsh family going that far back. But the origin of the name etymologically stems from the word from apple tree, right? And this Proto-Celtic apple, which is the name of Avalon. And of course, Avalon is deeply tied to the Arthurian legends, and as are this Affleck and this Morgan family name. Of course, and they say that this guy, the first one, was the father of the goddess Modron, right? And Modron may have been a prototype for Morgan Le Fay of the Arthurian legends. There's room to go with this, but I want to try to keep this one short if I can. But it's this Proto-Celtic that interests me, and this is what I think I can tie it back to Augustine here. There it is. Because, when I was growing up, I always thought of the Celtic people. They were the British Isles, Ireland more specifically because of my youth with watching the Boston Celtics, right? But northern France as well. But to find out that the Celtic culture goes as far east as Eastern Europe, to Bohemia, to the regions of the modern Czech Republic. And that's going to be a point of interest going forward when I start really getting into the old histories, hopefully next week. So that's how I feel like I can connect all of this stuff. And that's why I think is it a coincidence that this James Morgan, settles and dies at this Bohemian manor, which was founded by Augustine Hermann, and that the Bohemian school, the Bohemian manor, the Jesuit school is there? And these connections, are these coincidental connections? And bringing it all the way back to the royal families through to earlier than the Roman conquest of Britannia. It can't be a coincidence. It could be a mirage. It could be FATa Morgana. Anyway, I don't know. So until the next one, cheers, guys.